All right, so you're here with us because you want to get to the bottom of things right, really understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
We all know the headlines can be confusing sometimes, right? So today we're doing a deep dive to get past all that noise and see what's really happening.
Yeah.
What we're diving into is something called DOGE,
Hmm.
which stands for the Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
This is that task force started by President Trump with Elon Musk leading the charge,
Right.
and they're trying to really make some big changes to the federal government.
They are?
The sources we've been looking at for this deep dive are all news reports from around March 27th, 2025.
Okay.
And the goal is to really see what's going on with these DOGE layoffs, right? Like
Yeah.
how many people are actually being let go? How's that affecting everyday Americans? And why are so many people so upset about it?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of strong feelings out there.
So, okay, you got this idea. You want to shrink the federal workforce.
Yeah.
How does something like DOGE even get started?
Well, it all starts with an executive order from President Trump.
Oh,
An executive order. It's a directive from the president to the executive branch. And it basically has the force of law without needing Congress to approve it.
I see.
So it's a pretty powerful tool. And in this case, it's how DOGE was born. And what's really interesting is that Elon Musk is the one leading it. He's someone from outside the traditional government structure.
Yeah, that's a pretty unusual choice.
It is.
So what exactly are they hoping to achieve with DOGE? What are their goals?
Well, the big ones they talk about are cutting federal spending, right?
Okay.
And reducing the size of the workforce, all with this focus on making the government more efficient.
And this is happening with this massive national debt looming over
Yeah,
everything.
exactly. The national debt sitting at a whopping $36 trillion.
Yikes.
So there's definitely a sense of urgency driving this.
And the way DOGE is set up, it's supposed to be pretty independent, right?
That's right. They're kind of operating outside the normal government bureaucracy.
So what does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, the idea is that it lets them move faster, make changes more quickly without getting bogged down in all the usual red tape.
I can see that, but it also seems like it could raise some concerns about oversight. Who's making sure everything's being done properly?
Oh, absolutely. And that's definitely something that's fueling a lot of the public reaction to this whole thing.
So DOGE has this mandate to shrink the federal workforce. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, they're not wasting any time, that's for sure.
So how many people are we talking about here?
By mid-February 2025, which is just weeks after the new administration took office,
Okay.
Reuters was already estimating over 9,500 federal employees had been laid off.
Wow.
And on top of that, they offered 75,000 buyouts to federal workers.
Okay, so those are people choosing to leave.
Yeah, but the thing is, the payouts for those buyouts, they weren't scheduled to happen until September 2025.
So a lot of people are in this limbo period. And I understand that the total numbers being thrown around for potential job cuts are way bigger.
Oh, yeah. Some sources are saying the total number of positions eliminated so far, including layoffs and buyouts, could be anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000.
That's huge. And what about the future?
Projections are saying we could see as many as 400,000 to 500,000 federal jobs cut by the end of 2025.
That's a lot of jobs.
It is a lot.
And that includes not just layoffs and buyouts, but a whole hiring freeze.
Right.
So when you think about the total federal civilian workforce being around 2.3 million people, that's a pretty dramatic reshaping.
Absolutely. And it seems like the people who are hit hardest initially are the newer employees, the ones with less than 1 or 2 years of service.
Why is that?
Well, it's likely because they don't have the same job protections that longer tenured employees have.
I see.
The ones who have been there longer.
So you have all these people, some just starting their careers, who are suddenly out of a job.
Right. It's a really tough situation.
So we've got these overall numbers, but can we drill down a bit? Which specific agencies are bearing the brunt of these DOGE cuts?
Yeah, so there are a few key agencies that have been hit particularly hard.
Oh.
For instance, the Department of Education. They've reportedly lost over 1,300 positions.
Wow.
And then there's USAI, the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Right, the ones who do a lot of work overseas.
Exactly. They've been impacted even more with around 7,000 people affected.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and then you have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB.
Right, they're the ones protecting consumers in financial matters.
Right, and they've seen about 215 departures.
So some pretty significant reductions across the board.
Yeah, and it's not just those agencies either.
So which other agencies are feeling the impact?
Well, the Social Security Administration, for example, they're a crucial agency, right? providing benefits to retirees and disabled people,
Right.
and they're planning for around 7,000 cuts.
That's going to affect a lot of people.
It is. And then you have the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service.
Right, the tax people.
They're the ones responsible for collecting taxes.
Mhm.
And they're reportedly targeting 12,000 positions.
Wow, that seems like a lot.
It is. And even the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA.
Right, they provide essential services to our veterans.
Right. And they've seen over 1,000 dismissals.
That's concerning.
Yeah, it's hitting a really wide range of services.
And it's not just these big, well-known departments, really.
No, it's impacting more specialized agencies, too, like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Right, NOAA, they handle our weather forecasting.
Exactly. They monitor our oceans and atmosphere, and they've reportedly laid off over 800 people.
Wow.
And then the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they've seen 388 positions eliminated.
So it's pretty widespread.
It really is. And there are a couple of cases that are particularly interesting.
What are those?
Well, at the USDA, there were some firings of bird flu experts. And at the National Nuclear Security Administration, they let go of some nuclear safety staff.
Okay.
And these firings ended up being reversed.
Why is that?
Well, there was a huge outcry from the public and from people within these agencies because it became really clear how dangerous those specific cuts could be.
Wow, so they had to backtrack.
They did, and I think it really highlights how complex this whole situation is.
Yeah, trying to make changes so quickly like that.
Right. It's bound to lead to some missteps.
It makes you wonder about the thought process behind some of those initial decisions.
Definitely.
So we're seeing the scale of these layoffs, we're seeing which agencies are being affected. But how does all this translate into real-world consequences for everyday people? Like, how are these DOGE layoffs actually impacting Americans' lives?
Well, the impact is being felt on a lot of different levels.
Okay.
First off, there are the immediate economic consequences.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Losing a federal job is a huge financial blow to individuals and families.
Right. It could affect their ability to pay their bills, their rent mortgages.
Exactly, and maybe even their student loans.
And the economic impact spreads beyond those directly affected, right?
Absolutely. Local economies that rely heavily on federal employees are starting to feel the pinch.
So how is that playing out?
Well, for example, Washington, D.C. saw a massive 36% jump in unemployment claims just in February 2025 alone.
Wow, that's a big increase.
It is, and it's not just big cities either.
Okay.
A lot of rural communities depend on federal facilities.
Right.
And those areas are seeing less economic activity as people spend less money.
So businesses are getting hit.
Yeah, small businesses in these areas like local restaurants, shops, service providers, they're all seeing fewer customers, which could create some major challenges down the road.
So it's a domino effect.
Exactly. And then there's also a broader impact on the national economy that we need to consider.
Okay, what are we talking about there?
Well, some economic models predict that cutting around 200,000 jobs could lead to a 0.1% reduction in the national GDP.
So the entire country's economy could shrink?
It could. And that's not even accounting for the fact that a lot of federal employees who still have their jobs are getting nervous and starting to cut back on their own spending.
Because they're worried about being next.
Exactly. It creates this whole atmosphere of uncertainty.
So it's not just about the direct financial impact on people and communities. We're also hearing about potential disruptions to really important government services.
Right. This is where it gets real for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So what are some examples of those potential disruptions?
Let's go back to the Social Security Administration.
Okay.
They're planning to cut 12% of their staff, remember?
Right.
Well, that could very likely lead to delays in processing benefits for retirees and people with disabilities who depend on those payments to make ends meet.
That's a big deal.
It is. And then you have the layoffs at NOAA.
Okay.
That raises some serious concerns about being able to get accurate and timely weather alerts out to people.
That's critical for public safety.
Right, especially when you're dealing with potential natural disasters.
Exactly. You can't put a price tag on a delayed hurricane warning.
Exactly. And what about environmental protection?
Right. What's
With that.
happening there?
With fewer staff at the EPA, there's a real worry that environmental regulations might be weakened and that they won't be able to enforce them as effectively.
Makes sense.
And remember that situation with the USDA bird flu experts?
Oh, yeah.
That highlighted the potential risks to our food safety systems as well.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. And it's not just about prevention either. There are reports of veterans facing delays in getting the medical care they need through the VA system.
That's not good.
It's not. And you know what's really ironic?
What's that?
One of the main goals of DOGE is to reduce the national debt.
Okay.
But some of these cuts might actually make things worse.
How so?
Well, think about the 12,000 positions they're cutting at the IRS.
Okay.
That could seriously weaken their ability to collect taxes efficiently.
So the government might actually bring in less money.
Exactly. Which would completely undermine their efforts to reduce the debt.
It seems a little counterproductive.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And all of this goes beyond these big economic and service issues, too. There's a whole human and community element to this that's getting overlooked.
Right. What's that about?
Well, a lot of communities across the country rely heavily on federal jobs.
Right, like we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And remember, most federal employees don't live in Washington, D.C.
They're spread out all over the country.
Right. They live in places like Kansas City, which has a big IRS presence, or in coastal areas where NOAA has facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And these communities are really feeling the strain as their friends and neighbors lose their jobs and the local economy takes a hit.
It's a ripple effect.
It is. And we're even seeing reports of federal employees who haven't been laid off considering quitting preemptively.
Out of fear.
Yeah, they're worried about more cuts coming down the line. They just want to have some job security.
It's understandable.
It is. And maybe the most telling sign of all is that public opinion polls from around this time showed 60% of Americans disapproved of what DOGE was doing.
That's a pretty significant majority.
It is. And the biggest concern people had was the potential loss of those essential government services we were talking about.
So it's not just a fringe group that's upset.
No, it's a pretty widespread sentiment.
And all of this really sets the stage for this growing backlash against both Trump and Musk that we're seeing.
Right.
So what are the main things driving this increasing resentment?
Well, I think one of the key things is that a lot of people feel like this whole thing was rushed and maybe not thought through very well.
Yeah, those reversed firings really make you wonder.
Right, like firing experts in nuclear safety and food security and then having to backpedal.
It doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
Doesn't it? And it really raises questions about whether the people making these decisions are thinking about the potential consequences carefully enough.
And on top of that, you have this strategy of mainly targeting newer employees.
Right.
It makes you wonder if they're really going after inefficiency or if they're just trying to get rid of anyone they can.
Right. Are they really targeting the right people, or are they potentially losing valuable skills and talent?
It's a valid concern.
It is. And then you have this whole issue of Elon Musk leading this effort.
Right.
Someone who's never worked in government before.
Yeah.
And the reports are saying that the DOGE team is actually quite small.
So it's like a handful of people making these huge decisions.
It does seem that way. And that's fueling a lot of worry about potential missteps and unintended consequences.
Right, like what could go wrong?
Well, there have been some warnings from former government officials about the risk of sensitive information getting leaked.
Okay.
The idea is that disgruntled former employees might try to retaliate by leaking data.
And that could be really damaging.
Oh, absolutely.
So beyond the way these changes are happening, there's also the question of whether they line up with the promises that were made, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, during his 2024 campaign, President Trump talked a lot about creating jobs and boosting economic growth.
Right.
But these layoffs directly contradict that message.
Yeah, and it seems like that's really resonating with his base.
Oh, definitely. In states like Alabama and West Virginia, which are typically Republican strongholds,
okay.
people are seeing their jobs disappear and services being cut, and they're not happy about it.
I can imagine.
There are even reports of some Trump supporters saying they feel let down.
Because it's affecting them directly.
Exactly. They might have expected cuts to what they see as the deep state.
Right, the supposed entrenched bureaucracy.
Right, but instead they're seeing these cuts impacting things like veteran services, agricultural programs, and rural aid, and that's hitting close to home for a lot of them.
And then there's this whole controversy surrounding Elon Musk's role in all of this.
Right.
He's heading up this major government initiative, but he was never elected, right? He doesn't have any official government position.
Right, and that's raising a lot of eyebrows.
And on top of that, he's a billionaire with major stakes in companies like Tesla and SpaceX.
Exactly, and some people see that as a huge conflict of interest.
It does seem like a tricky situation.
It is, and then there are reports that DOGE has been given access to really sensitive data from the Treasury and FEMA.
Wow, so they have access to financial and emergency response information.
Right, and that's really raising the alarm bells for a lot of people.
You can see why.
Yeah, even Senator Chuck Schumer has publicly criticized it, calling it an undemocratic power grab.
So there are some serious concerns about accountability here.
Definitely, there's this growing perception that DOGE might be driven more by Musk's personal agenda than by any objective pursuit of efficiency.
Like what kind of personal agenda?
Well, some people think he has a strong dislike for bureaucracy and that this is his way of dismantling it.
I see.
And there are even some who believe he might be trying to undermine DEI initiatives.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Exactly. And it's not just politicians who are worried.
Okay.
Public opinion polls from around this time show a growing unease about Musk having access to all this sensitive government data.
People are definitely paying attention.
They are. And it's not just limited to public opinion and political debates either. There are actual legal challenges happening as well.
So people are taking this to court.
They are, by this point, there were almost 24 lawsuits filed challenging the legality of what DOGE is doing.
Wow, that's a lot of legal action.
It is. And in some cases, courts have actually put a temporary halt to some of the layoffs, specifically at USAA and the CFPB.
So the courts are saying, hold on a minute.
Exactly. They're saying there might be some legal violations here. And a lot of the opposition stems from this argument that the executive branch is overstepping its boundaries.
Right, that they're going around Congress.
Exactly. Congress is supposed to have the power to decide on the budget.
Yeah.
But DOGE is essentially bypassing that process. And that's leading to calls for more accountability and judicial review.
So it's a real constitutional question.
It is.
So it sounds like the nation is pretty divided over this whole DOGE thing.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a strong partisan divide.
Right, with Republicans generally supporting the idea of a smaller government.
Right. They're all about efficiency.
And Democrats being more concerned about protecting public services.
Exactly. They're worried about the impact on people who rely on those services.
But it's not as simple as just Republicans versus Democrats, is it?
No, there are some interesting nuances within those divisions.
Like what?
Well, even some Republican senators like Katie Britt and Shelley Moore Capito have expressed reservations.
Okay.
They're worried about how these cuts are affecting their constituents, and they're calling for a more cautious approach.
So even within the Republican Party, there are different opinions.
Definitely. And it's interesting because even President Trump himself seems to have acknowledged that things might be moving too fast.
Really?
Yeah, reportedly he made a post on Truth Social where he compared DOGE's approach to using a hatchet instead of a scalpel.
So even he's hinting that maybe they need to be more precise with their cuts.
Exactly.
So taking all of this into account, what's your overall assessment of this DOGE initiative and its impact so far?
Well, it's clear that these DOGE layoffs are a really significant attempt to change the federal government in a big way, and they're doing it very quickly.
And it's having a ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing job losses all over the place,
Hmm.
the potential for essential public services to be weakened, and a real decline in public trust.
And all of this is happening while the long-term effects on the national debt and the supposed efficiency gains are still uncertain.
Right? It's like the immediate consequences are very real and very painful.
But the potential benefits are still hypothetical.
Exactly. And all of this is fueling the backlash against President Trump and Elon Musk.
Right.
People are upset about the way these cuts are being made. They feel like promises have been broken, and they're really questioning Musk's role in all of this.
And there's this sense that the whole thing is just being done too hastily and without enough regard for the proper procedures.
Absolutely. It's just like they're trying to bulldoze their way through.
So it sounds like the future success of DOGE really hinges on whether they can shift gears.
Yeah, can they move away from this chaotic, disruptive approach and start taking a more strategic and effective path?
And can they win back the public's trust?
Right, because right now they're facing a lot of opposition and legal challenges.
So it's definitely an uphill battle.
It is. The next few months are going to be crucial in determining how this whole thing plays out.
So to sum it all up for you, our listener, what we've seen in this deep dive is the incredibly fast implementation of this Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE,
Right.
which is being led by Elon Musk, and it's resulting in widespread layoffs across a whole bunch of federal agencies.
Yeah, and those layoffs are having a real impact on people's lives and communities.
Right. We're talking about economic hardship worries, about essential services being disrupted, and this growing sense of distrust in the government.
And all of this has fueled a pretty significant backlash against both President Trump and Elon Musk.
And that backlash is driven by several factors. Concerns about how these cuts are being implemented, the feeling that promises have been broken, questions about Elon Musk's influence, and this idea that the whole thing is just too rushed and too heavy-handed.
It really highlights this ongoing debate we have in this country about the role of government.
Right. How do we balance the need for efficiency with the responsibility to provide essential services to the people who need them?
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to consider, given all the disruptions we've talked about and the clear public outcry that's emerged. Is this really the best way to go about making these changes?
Right.
Does the potential for long-term efficiency really justify the pain that's being caused right now?
And could there have been alternative strategies that might have been less disruptive and more respectful of the important role that government plays in people's lives?
It's a question worth pondering as we continue to watch this story unfold.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon to explore more of